Season 16 brings us a massive meta change when it comes to the legends, with the new class system and putting the scan meta to a grinding halt. Today I'll go over the best and the worst legends in Apex Legends Season 16. Let's just dive straight into it. So let's start off the F tier with Revenant. His passive abilities are pretty useless because you're still a big, easy to hit chunky robot, and climbing faster or sneaking around won't change that. As for his tactical, the silence is decent, but overall doesn't do much proactively, and instead is a reactive ability that at best stops a character in their tracks for a few moments. The ultimate itself is kind of useless ever since its nerf with the loud sound effect and visual effect warning everyone that it's deployed, and Revenant relies on other movement legends to actually have the utility to get his desired effect. He's overall a chore to have on your team and needs to be synergized with other legends just to be of any value, but again, he does get a few brownie points as he can climb to a lot of places on maps such as the Broken Moon, and the zip rails do allow you to make some fun plays with the Death Totem. However, the Assault class passive doesn't add much to his kit other than a little bit more loot. It is also worth noting that with the changes to the other legends in this video, we might see more of a early rotate into the passive or defensive meta, in which Revenant can shine, but for now I'm going to keep him in the F tier. Next up on the list is of course Octane, because Revenant and Octane go together like peanut butter and jelly, all the way down in the F tier. Octane is pretty good in general with explosive gameplay and a fairly useful passive and tactical, and a pretty damn good ultimate with his jump pad. But the reason Octane is in the F tier is because while he does have good team utility, with his ultimate, the jump pad sends you in a very predictable direction that's very easy to beam, and as of a few patches ago, you can't really accurately shoot back from it either, making you an easy target for whomever you're jump padding to or even away from. He has very little mid to end game potential as well, and all of these things combined means he fails to make a case to place any higher than in the F tier. He too gets a few branding points for the verticality from his kit, but despite that he's not really that good. Octane is a skirmisher legend, meaning that he can see what's in the care package, and yeah, that's it. The passive isn't really that useful for him. He is especially bad in a slow meta, because a lot of teams being set up means that they're ready to deal with Octane coming in, and that turns him into an easy kill. And of course, let's close out the F tier with Ashe. She doesn't see much use on maps such as World's Edge, and can be used for rotations on Broken Moon and Stone Point, but I would argue one of the main powers from her kit is her passive, which is useful to find enemies with whom she can fight or set up ambushes, as it marks death boxes on the map to show you where enemies have been fighting within the last few minutes. Her tactical isn't as good, but it gives a little bit of poke without wasting resources, as well as having some niche uses as it can snare an enemy and stop them from running away. The ultimate phase tier can go up to 62.5 meters away in any direction and gives her the explosiveness for her and her own team that Octane and Pathfinder could only dream of. She can be valuable on Broken Moon or Storm Point, and she has seen play on other maps, but she doesn't really shine as well on World's Edge as Wraith does. If anything, the buff to Wraith, who we'll get to way later in the video, makes Ashe's portal obsolete in comparison. Sure, you can get into a position much easier, but the portal is just so short. So let's move on with the D tier, for the legends that kinda work, but mostly just have a niche use without much versatility, and as such probably shouldn't see that much play. Let's start off the D tier with Vantage. Her passive is pretty interesting, as aiming at an enemy will give you information on them and their team, including how many are alive and what armor set they use. She also has a bullet drop indicator for long range weapons, and her tactical is perfect to maneuver verticality. And finally there's her ultimate, which is a third weapon, a sniper rifle that deals a lot of damage on the second shot and even adds a damage buff against a hit enemy. This is especially useful if you take a high ground on Broken Moon or Storm Point, and allows you to make some pretty solid sniping plays no matter your loadout. However, her hitbox is almost as big as Caustic's, meaning that you will struggle in one-to-one fights, and that makes the good mobility sort of wasted. She's also just really clunky to play in general, but the sniper is pretty decent actually, especially if it isn't respected by the enemies, but leaves a very visible laser trail that gives away your position. All in all, she's a cool legend, but she doesn't really provide anything useful to her team, other than I guess her passive, and you really only need to know a full team's shields and know how many are alive in the very nichest of situations. Since Vantage is a recon legend, she can scan the server beacons to know the whereabouts of all the enemies on the map, but her kit leans more towards holding a position than chasing kills on the edge. Next up we have Mirage, who for the first time in all of my tier list videos have made it out of the F tier. Congratulations Mirage, but you're not there just yet. His passive is incredibly one-dimensional and easy to outplay if you're half decent at the game, since there is a sound when he revives, and if you get close enough there'll be very visible blue lights showing where he revives from, and it's pretty easy to guess where Mirage is reviving if you've been paying some attention. The 3 seconds of stealth after a revive for Mirage and his teammates does add a bit more value, but it's not enough to impact his tier much more than bumping him up to the D tier. His tactical could be used to fool the enemy, but most players have learned how to deal with it. However, if you manage to bamboozle an enemy, they will be tracked for a few seconds, which could make Mirage a bit of a fast scan meta legend. And finally, his ultimate has some juke and outplay potential, but Mirage is overall just a duelist and falls short the second he's fighting more than one enemy with his abilities on cooldown, and provides very little team play utility. The buffs have pushed him in the right direction, but unless someone proves me otherwise, I'm going to keep considering him one of the least useful duelist legends in the game. So let's move on with the last legend in the D tier, and that's a Lifeline. Lifeline is another legend that was kind of in a bad spot or stuck in power creep limbo, and even more so with the rise of Newcastle. Lifeline's kit is outdated, as I've covered in previous videos, despite Respawn's best efforts. The real power lies in her passive that allows Lifeline to revive both of her teammates at once while not needing to be stuck in an animation, and instead be ready to deal with incoming teams, heal herself up, or loot whatever she feels like. The thing is, while this is a pretty strong passive and it is pretty hard to counter, it is incredibly niche, and you only get value from it when your teammates are already down. You want the value from your legend when everyone's alive, so you can win your fight. And this wouldn't be a problem if her tactical or ultimate had any real use, but the tactical is a small drone that floats around and slowly heals health, and her ultimate just gives you better loot at a hefty 3.5 minute cooldown. Her ultimate dropping basically instantly and her not being slowed for as much when activating a revive is a nice quality of life change that would bring her a bit more up to speed with the rest of the roster, but she's still losing out hard on power creep and as such sits in the D tier. So let's move on with the C tier, for legends with niche uses but a little bit more viability. Unless combined with legends in higher tiers, I would still use other legends instead. So let's start it off with Crypto, who's actually getting a massive change to his identity this season. In previous seasons, Crypto could be used on the edge of the map if forced to, but saw most of his value as an early rotation legend that enables his team to land in less than ideal points of interest, getting the ring information fast with his drone and then rotating. He would then relay information from his drone to his team as they rotated, and later set up, and could EMP either defensively to stave off enemies, or even aggressively when pushing a Watson team. His whole identity more or less revolved around rotating early, and the more teams played Watson, the more useful he would be. But seeing as Crypto is a recon legend, he can no longer scan the beacon for ring information, and instead, scanning the ring will give information about all the enemy's whereabouts. This means that Crypto no longer sees much value from rotating early, and he can no longer drop in questionable places to get the early zone knowledge because they don't exist anymore. You can instead choose Crypto as an edge legend, grabbing information about the enemy team's whereabouts to control the edge or zone, or chasing isolated fights to a higher extent than any of the recon legends, as he can fly his drone and scan the riskier beacons, as well as scanning beacons that are way outside of the ring. His EMP can be useful in teamfights, but it's nothing to write home about. This playstyle can be viable, but is extremely hard to pull off properly, and as such, I'm going to keep him in the C tier. Next up is Horizon. We all know how she works with the passive giving you a glide and removing false stun, her tactical giving a gravity lift to her and her team, as well as the ultimate black hole sucking enemies in for easy targets and highlighting them to make them easy to shoot, grenade, and get free kills. However, this season she received a huge nerf to both of the most important abilities in her kit, that being the tactical and ultimate, which completely gimps the playstyle many Horizon mains have been crutching for the last few seasons. First off, you are no longer accurate going up to tactical with an increased weapon spread the higher up you go. This is also coupled with a faster gravity lift vertical speed, making you lose accuracy that much faster. Her ultimate also saw a nerf that was hidden in the patch notes, where the ultimate no longer sucks enemies through bubbles or around line of sights. This should mean that the black hole only will pull enemies close enough and with a direct line of sight to it, making it that much harder to get value. Horizon can still be useful in other ways, but as she's lost the two things that made her broken in Season 15 and before, I can't put her any higher than the C tier with good conscience. Next up is a legend that will punish passive bunkering teams, and that is Fuse. Fuse hasn't really found a spot in the meta ever since he was released because he just didn't have any use. His tactical knuckle cluster is a perfect tool to deny legends angles and space for 6 seconds per cluster, and his enemies will lock enemies within a ring of fire while at the same time exposing them to your teammates through scan, which I guess is especially useful with the nerf or straight up removal of several scanning abilities this patch. Fuse being an assault legend actually helps him out a bit as well. His passive not only allows him to throw grenades faster and farther, but also to stack ordnances in his inventory. This, combined with the additional ammo capacity, allows you to stack way more grenades in Season 16 than previously. But Fuse will only work against a certain playstyle when Fuse and his teammates have plenty of space and is incredibly difficult to pull off, and as such will have to stay in the C tier. Another legend that should have use but I fail to see having too much value in this meta is Rampart. Her passive modded loader increases magazine size and decreases reload time with LMGs, and the tactical amped cover allows you to place up to 5 one-way barriers at a time that blocks incoming shots and boosts outgoing damage. And her ultimate goes hand in hand with bunkering up and can either act as a secondary handheld weapon, much like Vantage's ultimate, or it can be placed as a minigun that anybody can use. The minigun itself doesn't serve much of a purpose when placed, as it needs to be revved up and turns you into an easy kill, but it's pretty strong when taking fights in its mobile mode. Rampart is pretty strong as a base legend, but her abilities scale exponentially when coupled with at least one more bunker legend, such as Newcastle, Watson, or Caustic. But since she is a controller legend as well, there isn't much of a reason to run her alongside them, as you lose out on other valuable abilities when stacking 2 zone scanning legends together. And next up is a legend that was nerfed, very hardest patch through a rework. We are of course talking about Bloodhound, who went from a great fighter alongside a Bangalore to a legend that's simply used for tracking down your enemies. And that's also the thing, Bloodhound is still a recon legend, so the new tracking-based playstyle definitely feels like overkill. Their new passive spawns a white raven when enemies aren't nearby, and if these ravens are interacted with either through a scan, which refunds your tactical, or just pressing the interact key up close, they will start flying in the direction of the nearest enemy team. Using a raven will refund 25% tactical and ultimate charge, and the raven leaves a misty trail behind for Bloodhound and their teammates to follow. The tactical saw a fairly hefty nerf as well, with the full body scan being reduced to 1 second instead of 3, and the enemies then turning into a diamond target for the rest of the duration, meaning that the wall hack uptime has been significantly reduced. Especially when combined with their ultimate, as using it no longer speeds up the cooldown rate of their tactical, and instead, along with the rest of its features, will spawn a white raven that flies to the nearest enemy. Finishing an enemy will also trigger a white raven so you can keep tracking the enemy team down. Again, tracking as utility isn't really that valuable, at least compared to the scanning power that we lost, especially when combined with the recon beacons that already sort of let you find enemies in the first place, so I can't rate Bloodhound any higher than C tier with good conscience. And next up, I hate that this next legend has to be in the C tier because despite the buffs, there are some hidden nerfs that weren't accounted for, and the changes to the rest of the legend roster leaves a bit to be desired. We're talking about a previous favorite of mine, that being Pathfinder. Contrary to popular belief, he has a passive, and it actually was buffed this season, where scanning a care package through your skirmisher ability will refund your zipline and give you a cooldown reduction of 10 seconds per care package up to 4 times a game. His grapple is the most significant part of his kit, and his ultimate isn't the most useful, but it does have some uses in rotating fast, taking high ground in a mid to late game, or jumping around to stay alive for a little bit longer. But the zipline has also been tweaked a bit this season with a longer range, 66 faster speed as a buff, but then there's a bit of a nerf with no longer being able to place it in out-of-bounds areas, and there now being a longer minimum zipline distance, which makes mid-fight ziplines clunky, and it also has a slower exit speed. Let me be clear, I'm aware of how popular Pathfinder is in Predator lobbies, but that being said, he was also popular in previous seasons despite not being the best, because he's a fun and flashy legend, a content machine if you will. But if the lobbies get rough, almost his entire kit essentially gets disabled, and dueling with his large hitbox is just too much of a disadvantage. And let me close out the C tier with a legend that pains me to put here as well, that being Gibraltar, who's probably the least useful legend out of this space creating tanky supportive role. He has his own twist on that role with more of a aggressive attack sort of style. He did fall out of relevance after a 8 or so season reign, and was a must-pick thanks to his strong duelist kit due to his Fortify coupled with the gun shield, along with his bubble providing infinitely valuable cover and his ultimate being a good way to clear out open areas and providing space. Gibraltar was initially knocked out of the meta due to the rise of other legends such as Horizon and Seer directly countering his bubble, and with them gone, along with the buff to shotguns, which is Gibraltar's forte, you could make the argument that he is more viable, but the sad truth is that we've realized that there are other tanky support legends that I would argue are more versatile and at the moment are just better than Gibraltar at their jobs. So let's dive into the B tier. These are legends that I believe are all around useful, especially as the skill level goes up into the high tier ranked and maybe even tournaments. So let's start off the B tier with Catalyst, who's seeing an unexpected but welcome viability in the new meta. With her being a controller legend, you could get away with running a Catalyst, get early scans from a ring console and then rotating in early. But the biggest value from her is her versatility. She can either be set up as a zone legend with her passive that allows her to reinforce doors, and the tactical that allows her to place ferrofluid spikes to block off whole areas, but she can also be an aggressive edge legend creating space out of thin air with her ultimate, the massive wall called the Dark Veil. As far as creating and manipulating space goes, she's a jack of all trades but a master of none. For example, other legends are better at holding positions and providing infinitely more utility, as Catalyst relies on the door reinforcement of her passive to set up in the first place, and other legends have better abilities for taking fights and manipulating space in the open. That being said, the potential for Catalyst is huge in fights, but she requires a lot of game sense to be played correctly. Moving on, we have Loba. Her passive Eye for Quality allows her to see epic and legendary loot through walls up to 112 meters away, giving her an edge when contesting other teams and generally rotating around with or without looting. And her tactical allows her to teleport to hard to reach places and to escape trouble. These abilities are cool and all, but the main reason she's so high up this list is her ultimate. The Black Market Boutique is a portable placeable device that allows you to teleport nearby loot straight into you or your teammate's inventory. Loba is the core legend in a sustained composition and is a great counter to the bunker meta and can even be played when looking for fights, but she mostly shines when holding a position very deep in the zone, as she can keep her teammates supplied from the safety of their own base. Since Loba now classifies as a support legend in the new system, she can also pick up crafted banners using her black market. Moving on with the rest of the B tier, we'll have a lot of space manipulators. You generally will want one space manipulator on your team, especially if you're playing a fighting or edge composition. The first one of these being Bangalore. Bangalore has a great passive ability, making her a very strong duelist, which gives her a movement speed whenever she takes fire. Her tactical, the Smoke Canister, allows her to smoke off entire teams to rotate forward, create temporary smoke walls in open areas, or smoke right on top of herself or an enemy to then scan with another legend, or use digital threats to kill them as they're blinded. It's especially good on large open maps such as Broken Moon or Stormpoint, since she can create smoke walls in the open or just blocking off entrenched teams, and as such create an insane amount of space for her own team. Her ultimate Barrage is pretty good as well, providing even more space. You can hold off an entire team from pushing for a good 20 seconds or so, or even throw it towards the team that you want to push to then run in after the explosions and take that position that you want. She is great at manipulating space and has a good dual ability, and the power from her smokes is even more exaggerated this season thanks to the decreased amount of scans. Bangalore Smoke is also good when fighting controller players, no not the class but the input, as they get less value from their aim assist. Next up is Newcastle, who sort of serves the same role as Gibraltar, but with a lot more versatility. He mostly thrives as a fighting edge support legend, defending his teammates and keeping them safe thanks to his passive, which lets Newcastle revive his teammates while still being able to move, as well as having a knockdown shield protecting them both during the revive. His passive can be combined with his tactical, which is a 400 health shield that can move around on command, and finally his ultimate is this large castle wall with an insane amount of health that stays until destroyed or placed somewhere else. Using this large castle wall allows Newcastle to instantly take high ground or jump to his teammates over 50 meters away. The ultimate has two parts, the first one being the leap, which allows Newcastle to either take a quick position or jump to his teammate's defense. Hell, he can even flank an enemy team and ultimates right back to his own team if he takes too much pressure. And the second part, the castle wall itself, which can create space out of thin air. Some very open maps, such as Stormpoint, have endings without any cover at all, and the castle wall allows you to create that cover and place somewhere in the later stages of the game where you would die otherwise. And closing out the tier, we have Seer, who received a pretty hefty nerf this season. His passive now only activates when aiming it at an enemy, and the enemy leaves a heartbeat, which they only do every 1.75 seconds. If Seer aims at an enemy through a wall, but the heartbeat doesn't play, he just doesn't know that they're there. This makes it harder to quickly use the passive mid-fight or indoors, and it's turned into more of a rat tracking or general broad strokes enemy location device. The change to his passive makes the nerf to his tactical even more brutal, as lining up the tactical is proving a lot harder without the constant wall hacks. Seer's tactical works the same as usual, but no longer gives the outline of an enemy when scanned, making it a tiny bit harder to track them after hitting them with the tactical. His ultimate has less uptime with a longer cooldown and a shorter duration. So overall, the wall-hack portions of Seer's abilities have been nerfed, but I still believe he can be very strong if you can figure out how to use him despite these nerfs. The tactical still shows health bars over the enemy's heads, which is very valuable, and it still cancels any channeled abilities such as heals or revives, which is even more valuable. As such, it's even more important than ever that you don't use the tactical ability to initiate the fight, and instead use it when you know you've made significant damage to an enemy, so you know that you'll either cancel a revive, a battery, or a phoenix. At a certain level, cancelling a battery is enough to win the fight, so that will be all you need. That being said, due to how hard he is to use, and since he has no other use in public matches, I'm forced to play Seer in the B tier. But now we're heading into the A tier. These legends are a near must pick, and at the very least, extremely useful in almost all situations. Now, the first legend in this tier is going to look a little bit weird, because we're starting it off with Mad Maggie, who I can see being useful both as a harasser in the zone a la Aurora comp, or playing on the edge to run teams down. Her passive both gives you a wall hack on the enemies you deal damage to and a speed boost akin to running with your hands out when wielding shotguns, which is very noticeable with the shotgun buffs this season, because the extra mobility gives you a huge edge when taking shotgun battles. Her drill also stacks with the passive, being one of the few ways to still get information through walls in the current meta. It can be used to siege teams and bully Watson pylons, as well as deny space so Maggie and her team can push up. The Wrecking Ball can also be thrown into full teams to stun and discombobulate them, as well as to almost break any objects in front of you. I believe Maggie can be in the A tier when used correctly, especially when fighting bunkered up passive teams, which we probably will see a lot of this meta. Moving on is probably one of the most valuable rotation legends in the game, that being Valkyrie. Her passive allows you to find enemies when skydiving and a lot of extra mobility when taking fights and rotating. The tactical missiles let you break doors and harass teams, as well as poking enemies and forcing them out from behind cover. And the ultimate is the most crucial part of her kit, something that's so valuable that it transcends all maps and makes her an incredibly valuable asset on her own, that being the Skyward Dive, which launches Valkyrie and her teammates straight up like a redeployable balloon. This ability allows your team to rotate into a spot faster than running, taking the bird's path and cutting past teams and other obstacles such as chokes, but also serves as a great get out of jail free card if you happen to be locked out of the zone or other teams trying to kill you on the rotate. I believe you want Valkyrie or Wraith in every team composition this season, no matter what playstyle that you're going for. Another legend that you might want on your roster no matter the playstyle may be a controversial one, but that's Caustic. That's right, just like Catalyst, Caustic is valuable both for holding a position and pushing enemy teams. The passive doesn't do too much except stave off intruders in his smoke and surviving enemy caustics, but the tactical, the gas trap, can create cover, space, and allow him and his teammates to stay alive for an indefinite amount of time to the gas holding enemies off. Traps can be launched defensively to block doors and claim areas, as well as aggressively into enemy teams almost like grenades. And if they aren't destroyed, they will start spewing gas everywhere, which stuns, slows, and damages the enemy teams. The traps are Caustic's strong suit and benefits the most for being used indoors, as Caustic can control the sightlines and reduce the risk of them being shot out. The ultimate, his gas grenade, can be used defensively to keep his team alive for longer by filling his position with gas for 11 seconds, which allows Caustic to heal up, revive his team, and place new traps, but it can also be used as a smokescreen mid-rotation and an aggressive ability to gas out enemy entrenched teams, especially when combined with Maggie in the so-called Aurora composition. These two playstyles allow Caustic to either play super defensive or sort of aggressive, and then bunkering up. On its own, the gas and the threat from the gas grenade makes Caustic one of the last legends that any team wants to push, meaning that if you get to wipe a full squad, you can quickly set up to stave off any third parties much more efficiently than any other defensive legend in the game. And next up is Watson, who is also a defensive legend with another type of versatility. Because while Caustic is versatile, as in whether he wants to be aggressive or defensive, Watson is just a defensive legend, but incredibly valuable in any type of defensive play. Her passive allows her to carry 2 ultimate accelerants per inventory slot, with 1 ultimate accelerant instantly replenishing her ultimate, and it also passively heals her own shield, which certainly adds up if you're playing zone, but you don't want to waste shield heals. Her tactical, her fences, can be used in a multitude of ways, mainly defensively, to either claim buildings or entire areas in the open, acting almost like a visual reminder of the space your team controls. Though, keep in mind, using her fences in the open only works if teams in the lobby respect you. Her ultimate, the Defensive Pylon, allows Watson to set up and eat all incoming ordinances, as well as providing cover, replenishing her fences faster, and healing her and her teammates' shields up to a certain point per pylon. All in all, having a Watson when holding a position will allow you to visually claim the space you're playing and keep you and your teammates sustained when it comes to shields, and if the going gets rough, the Defensive Pylon will keep you and your teammates alive throughout the pushes. Since Watson is a controller legend, you can also have her on your team to get early zone information and rotate early. And finally, let's take a look at the S tier legends, or actually just the one. This one might be up for contention, so I'm curious to hear what you guys think, and as usual, if you've made it this far, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. The last legend, probably the best legend this season, has to be Wraith. This might come as a complete surprise because she's been in such a bad state for so long. What happened? Well, I guess Wraith has always been decent for public matches, especially if you ask the movement gamers, but she hasn't seen much use in competitive. Mainly because her portal was losing out on potential due to power creep, meaning new legends were just that much stronger than Wraith. And eventually, she just wasn't relevant anymore. Because if you played position, you needed a legend to set up and a legend to scan the beacon. And since Valkyrie had the rotations, Wraith was just left behind. But enough about Valkyrie, let's talk about Wraith. First off, let's face it, her passive is useless. But her tactical Enter the Void, even with the finger-sniffing animation, is amazing, as it allows Wraith to play very far forward, and on flanks that no other legend could simply dream of. This makes Wraith the perfect flanker and entry fragger, especially when you keep in mind she has a tiny, very difficult to hit hitbox. And with the buff to her portal, she can now rotate insanely far, up to 150 meters with the portal. This is incredibly valuable in the mid and especially late games, as she can travel across the entire later rings with one portal and safely get her team to the other side, where she previously would fall short in actually making portals to where she wants to go. Also, the new airlab animations have nothing to do with her viability, but shout out to them because they look great. If you guys want to see some Season 16 tips, check out the video on the screen. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.